Hello, my name is Lewis and welcome to Gathering the Magic. Today we're looking at the top 10 best Abzan commanders in MTG. Starting off this Abzan list we have Teneb the Harvester. Originally from Planar Chaos, this 6/6 dragon with flying says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2 and black. If you do, put target creature in a graveyard into play under your control. This deck is focusing all on that reanimator. We're throwing in all of those cards like Teneb, focus on getting those creatures out of the graveyard and onto the field. We can even fill the deck with all of those cards that will sack our creatures to get creatures out because we have all of those pro-graveyard loving cards in our hand. And when you think of all of those ETB loving cards you can throw in a deck like this to bring back over and over again for that removal, recursion, or maybe even some ramp, then this is a deck that can really start to synergise well. Plus, Teneb says any graveyard, so it doesn't have to be your own. Lastly, we want that combat damage to trigger, so why not put a few unblockable lovers in there? Teneb is a great and different option for commander that when that damage goes through, you'll be having recursion for days.
Very poor. No, we gotta be more subtle than that. I don't want them to know that we're thinking about them.
Before we get on to number 9, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe down below for all things MTG. Subscribing is completely free to do and it helps our channel grow and grow. We've also just added a channel membership too, so go ahead and become a prickly pal today. Number 9 on this Abzan list is Kolfonor, the Last U. From Commander Legends, this 3/7 Treefolk Shaman with Vigilance and Reach says whenever it or another creature you control dies, return up to one other target creature card with lesser toughness from your graveyard to your hand. For this deck we're going down that Aristocrats route. We're going to have all of those ways to sacrifice our own creatures as when they die, we can get one with less toughness of that now dead creature from our graveyard to our hand. To synergise well with this strategy, having all of those cards that will boost up our creature's toughness are key, so even if a 1/1 dies, because it's going to be stronger defensively, we'll be able to gain even more from its death. Lastly, as we are focusing on death with Kolfonor, pack in every card we can find that will have some positive death triggers, drain our opponents, maybe gain some life of our own, or maybe get some good old value card draw. You love to see it. Coming in at number 8 we have Anafenzer, the Foremost. From Khand of Tarkir, this 4/4 human soldier says when it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on another target tapped creature you control, and if a creature card will be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Lots of Anafenzer decks focus on those +1/+1 counters, especially with that Outlast mechanic. Getting all those ways to constantly get counters on your creatures, and even cards that will double all of those counters hitting your creatures. Especially in white-green, +1/+1 counters are so common that going down this route will be easy to pad out your deck in no time at all. Lastly, if you want it to be really evil and focus solely on that second part of Anafenzer, just throw in all of those sacrifice-loving creatures and all other creature-destructive cards so your opponents won't be able to get anything from their graveyard and they'll have less recursion and less chance to win the game. Milling is also an option as it says put into a graveyard from anywhere, so why not throw in some of those too? That is what we call devilishly disgusting. Next on the list we have Kethis the Hidden Hand. From M20, this 3/4 Elf Advisor says legendary spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and you can exile 2 legendary cards from your graveyard. Until end of turn, each legendary card in your graveyard gains, you may play this card from your graveyard. So here we're obviously going down that legendary route. Whether it's legendary creatures, planeswalkers, sorceries and more, it really doesn't matter as thanks to Kethis they're costing 1 less to cast. We want in all of those copies of cards like Reki that will draw us a card when we play those legendary spells, or others to beef up our creatures and much more. If we wanted, we could expand to all of those cards that trigger whenever a historic card is cast, as it widens what we can play a fair bit. Finally, there's no real synergy to this card, but it's Abzan and one of my favourites, so throw in that eerie ultimatum. Return every permanent with a different name from your graveyard to the field, which in a game of Commander should lead to some disgusting action. Get the win and pray your friends will play with you again someday. Just missing out on the top half we have Duran, the Siege Tower. Originally from Lorwyn, this 0/5 Treefolk Shaman says each creature assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Where have I seen a card like this before?
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture.
So here we're going toughness crazy, throwing in all of those creatures that have big toughness so when Duran attacks, that damage is going right at your opponent's creatures or face. We'll throw in all of the similar enchantments that assign damage as toughness rather than power too, in case Duran gets targeted or isn't on the field. With plenty of other ways too to beef up that toughness to your low powered army, you'll be smashing through your opponent's army in no time. Lastly, if you wanted to go tribal, focus on the abundance of tree folk that MTG has, especially in that green colour. We've got trees to boost your trees, some indestructible trees, and even our old friend Kolfonor that we could stick into the 99. A really cool deck, and one to potentially give you less restrictions than Arcades, as they don't have to be Defender. But you don't get that card draw. Coming in at number 5 we have Tyam, Luminous Enigma. From the Commander 20 set, this 3/3 Nightmare Beast says each of the creature you control enters with a Vigilance counter on it, and you can pay 3 and remove 3 counters amongst creatures you control. Put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, then return a permanent with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the field. In this deck we're going counter crazy. We want counters across all of our board so we can remove them and get some graveyard recursion. Any counters will do for a deck like this, whether that's the traditional +1/+1 counters, Vigilance counters, Menace counters and more. Sets released around that time like Ikoria went counter crazy, so padding this deck out will take no time at all. Another deck we can also self-mill if we want to too, as it gives us more chance to get some creatures from the graveyard back onto the field. As we said, a commander that was actually released as part of the 99 in one of those Commander 20 precons, and that commander just happens to be next. Missing out on that bronze medal spot, we have Cathril Aspect Warper. From that Commander 20 precon, this 3/3 Nightmare Insect says when it ETBs, put a flying counter on any creature you control if a creature card in your graveyard has flying. Repeating the process for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Hexproof, Indestructible Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Trample and Vigilance. Then putting a +1/+1 counter on Cathril for each counter put on a creature this way. For a Cathril deck, it's key to have those creatures with every witch ability. Those cards like Zatalpa and Akroma are huge, as they have almost every ability ever printed on them. Throw in all of those especially Golgari loving cards that will give you the important self-mill to get those keywords in the graveyard, then play Cathril and go counter crazy. Finally, let's finish Cathril with the iconic Gathering the Magic card of the deck award. Here we're giving it to Debridge Chant. This enchantment ETBs milling you for a massive 10, but at the beginning of your upkeep choose a card at random. If it's a creature it goes straight onto the battlefield, otherwise it goes into your hand. A great card that combines all of my favourite things in Magic: recursion and randomness. Coming in at number 3 we have Gave, Guru of Spores. From Commander 2011, this Fungus Shaman ETBs with 5 +1/+1 counters on it. You can pay 1 and remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature you control to put a 1/1 sapling token onto the field, and pay 1 and sack a creature to put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature. For a deck like this, I'd focus all around those saplings. There are dozens of ways within MTG to create those saplings, so we're going to add all of them in. Create this huge sapling army that we can beef up, go wide with, or have a sacrificial slaughter to Gave. If we don't want to focus on those saplings though, we can again lean into that +1/+1 counter theme. Throw in all of the counters everywhere, use Gave's ability to remove the counters and then start that tiny plant army from there. Gave's ability allows you to remove counters of any of your creatures, so if we're getting those counters from elsewhere, we can keep Gave nice and strong and hopefully be a big strong threat against your opponents. A very cool commander, and one that although doesn't seem it, presents many different ways to build a deck around it. Runner up and the second best commander we have Carador, Ghost Chieftain. Another originally from the Commander 11 set, this 3/4 Centaur Spirit costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard, and during each of your turns you may cast 1 creature card from your graveyard. Another Abzan commander loving that graveyard, this deck is going graveyard heavy. Let's start with all of that mill. We want some within this deck to make sure we're stockpiling some creatures to not only make Carador cheaper to cast, but also some instant creature recursion when it's out. If we're milling here, there is a good chance that we're wasting lands, so do cram in plenty of those ways to play lands from our graveyard, as being mana screwed during a game of Commander is one of the worst things going. Finally, lots of creature recursion means packing in all of the nasty ETB loving creatures, so if any of these hit the graveyard, it's no bother at all, as it means there's more chance to play them again and again, and ramp, remove, or a chance to play endgame creatures to finish off your opponents and get that victory royale. I now already want to make my own Carador deck. List videos like this are not good for my wallet. Winner and the best Abzan commander is Nethroi, Apex of Death. Released in Ikoria, this 5/5 with Death Touch and Lifelink says when this creature mutates, return any number of target creature cards with total power 10 or less from your graveyard to the field, with a mutate casting cost of 4 green or white and 2 black. For this deck we're going all aboard the mutate train. Ikoria and their related precons were filled to the brim with all of those cards Mutate loving, so pack in everyone you can find because the more we can mutate Nethroi, the more disgusting our board state can become. Mutate really was a very unique and interesting mechanic that I'd love to see them bring back sooner rather than later, especially as it will help grow decks like this. Throw in all of those creatures that also benefit from your creatures being stuck in the graveyard. This again is another deck that thrived on those cards being packed in the graveyard, so throw in all of those ways to get creatures in there, and the second Nethroi mutates, it will completely change the board for you and your opponents. Lastly, let's just talk about the 2 alternate arts that were released during this set. Both of them are absolutely incredible. There we have it, that is the list. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for all things MTG. Check out our link tree in the description below for all of our social media and affiliate links. For now though, I'm all tapped out, so I'll see you in the next video.